Stretford and Urmston to the committee, and it is, in my view, unfortunate that her appointment has been linked with that of the member in question. Mr. Speaker, it seems that since I've been in this House, and almost on a weekly basis, and from memory usually on a Wednesday around about noon, that you remind the House how important the public perception of the workings of this House and the behaviour of its members in fashioning the public opinion of Parliament and indeed our whole democratic system. Mr. Speaker, you were quoted only last week following the hugely successful Nottinghamshire event, and I quote, "There is a lot of evidence that people have a low opinion of politics and politicians." I agree, Mr. Speaker, and this is unfortunately true. And I do not believe that the member for Leicester East joining the Justice Committee will do anything to enhance the reputation and perception of Parliament amongst the public. Indeed, it will do the opposite. I will give way to the Honourable.
I'm grateful. I'm a member of the Justice Committee. I'm also a member of the Labour Party, and as the member for North Herefordshire said, it is the Labour Party's choice to put the right honourable gentleman for Leicester East on this committee. What right has the honourable gentleman got to tell the Labour Party who to put on our committees?
Well, if that's the honourable gentleman's belief, then I suggest he speaks in this debate on behalf of his right honourable friend. In representing this, the committee representing this House, it also reflects on this House. As a member of this House, I have a right to object.
Clarify for the House what the rights of members of other parties, those that don't actually have the nominating rights, are in these matters, now that we have changed our rules so that each party selects and nominates its own preferred candidates.
It is the House that appoints to the committee, and it is for the House to decide. It is on that basis that these matters are brought to the House and subject to motions moved by the Committee of Selection. Of course, as the Right Honourable Gentleman's long experience will tell him, it is normal and commonplace for these matters to go through without objection, but it is perfectly orderly for someone to object. I'll come to the Honourable Gentleman, who will continue with his speech in a moment, if he or she so wishes. The Honourable Gentleman, the member for North West Leicestershire, himself anticipated the possibility that the Chair might take an interest if he were to cross the line between what was legitimate and orderly to say and what was not. Thus far, the Honourable Gentleman has observed that distinction, and on that basis, I am content for him at this stage to continue. Mr. Andrew Bridgen.
That's right, Chief. I'd order, Mr. Speaker.
Forgive me. Point of order, Mr. John Speller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's absolutely right that we have procedures, but we also have conventions which evolve. And the convention that has evolved in this House, as far as I'm aware, is that each of the parties within their own ranks decides their members of the committee, although the whole House votes, rightly or wrongly, on who the chair of the committees should be. And therefore, gratuitously, for a member to try and disrupt that convention, I think is extremely unfortunate, even if it may be just the right standing order.
What the Right Honourable Gentleman is saying, I am not insensitive to him or to his point, which is made with his usual force and eloquence. That said, a convention is one thing and a binding rule is another. And I must simply make the point that at this stage, the Honourable Gentleman is in order. He may have offended the sensibilities of the Right Honourable Gentleman, and indeed departed from what is normal convention in this place, but he is at this stage in order. Mr. Andrew Bridgen.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for that clarification, and I'm pleased that so far with the speech is so good. Mr. Speaker, an allegation in the Sunday Mirror with supporting video footage implied that the Right Honourable Member for Leicester East had offered to purchase Class A drugs whilst using the services of escorts. I think I'm going to make a little progress if the...
No, you don't have to go away. You don't have to go. I think it's very interesting. The honourable members should be citing the tabloid press, which from time to time can take an unhealthy interest in his activities. That's not disproved, and he's not the one who's up to justice.
Mr. McCartney, calm yourself. Be quiet, young man. We don't need to hear from you. You add nothing and you subtract from the proceedings. Mr. Bridgen is perfectly capable of addressing these matters to the best of his ability and according to his own lights. He doesn't require a sedentary interjection from you. Mr. Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm here to try and address matters about the reputation of this House. If the honourable gentleman wishes to make light of it, that's his matter, and for his conscience, it is not for mine. I'm here to give my speech and to obviously force a vote of the House of Commons where he will quite be at liberty to make his opinion known. Mr. Speaker, in July this year, the Home Affairs Select Committee published a report calling for the decriminalisation of soliciting by sex workers and also to decriminalise sex workers sharing premises. It also looked at the use of poppers. This was a committee at the time chaired by the Right Honourable Member for Leicester East, and following the much publicised expose in the Sunday Mirror, he was, belatedly in my view, or he decided to resign from his position. And yet here we are, only a relatively few weeks later, and the same member is seeking a position on the prestigious and influential Justice Committee, while matters relating to his recent resignation remain completely unresolved. Mr. Speaker, I wrote to Scotland Yard on the 5th of September to establish whether a crime had been committed by the Right Honourable Member with regards to the allegation of conspiracy to supply a controlled substance. I received a letter dated the 9th of September from Commander Stuart Cundy of the Specialist Crime Investigation Unit, stating that they have commenced an assessment of the information, and following this assessment, a decision will be taken on the most appropriate course of action. Mr. Speaker, no course of action has yet been determined by Scotland Yard, so a potential police investigation still hangs over the Right Honourable Member. Also on the 5th of September, I wrote to the Commissioner for Parliamentary Standards with regard to the Right Honourable Member, and an investigation was instigated and then immediately suspended, as is the procedure, pending the result of the police assessment, which I mentioned earlier. So should Scotland Yard decide in due course not to investigate the said member with regards to potential criminal activity, the Parliamentary Standards investigation will immediately commence. Mr. Speaker, I think it's fair to say that the Right Honourable Member for Leicester East has quite a history with his appearances before Parliamentary Standards. He was subject of extensive parliamentary inquiries by Elizabeth Filkin, the then Parliamentary Commissioner, into allegations of misconduct in 2001 and 2002. He was suspended from this House for 1 month in 2002 for breaches of the MP's Code of Conduct. Mr. Speaker, I do not intend to list all the Right Honourable Members' brushes with Parliamentary Standards, as I do not wish to detain colleagues later than absolutely necessary this evening. Further to my letter to the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, where I urged Scotland Yard to liaise with Leicestershire Police, it has been stated that 4 witnesses have confirmed that they were recently interviewed by Leicestershire Police and that their inquiries have been going on for at least a year. These concerns allegations that the Right Honourable Member for Leicester East abused his position in public office.
Order. The Honourable Gentleman will resume his seat. He will know that I take advice on these matters, and having treated of matters that are very much within the public domain until now, the Honourable Gentleman's speech has strayed from there, and I have consulted on this matter, and he is now treating of matters that are not in the same category. He must desist. Mr. Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have raised concerns with you about the conduct of the Right Honourable Member for Leicester East historically.
The Honourable Gentleman will resume his seat. Let me say clearly and in terms that brook of no contradiction to the honourable gentleman, that he would be unwise to go into those matters. He's written to me, and I have written back to him, and I explained to him factually, in a manner that cannot be disputed or gainsaid, that it is not for the Speaker of this House to seek to persuade someone to step down as the chair of a committee because of suspicions that some people might have about him. That is not the role of the Speaker of the House of Commons. And if the honourable gentleman were a more experienced member, he would probably be aware of that fact. So I would urge the honourable gentleman to focus on those matters which it is proper and legitimate for him to raise, and not upon those which it is not. Mr. Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you have often spoken that this place must reflect the society for which we make the laws, and I agree with you. I respectfully point out to the House that in any other sphere of activity, a candidate with so much hanging unresolved over him would be very unlikely to be considered for such an important office. I believe, and if the right honourable member were in his place today, I would ask him to stand down from his nomination. But he's not. So I would ask this House to reject his appointment. Otherwise, I think, Mr. Speaker, we cannot blame the great British public for having a low opinion of its politician and its politics. We can only blame ourselves. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I would leave the House with this question. If the right honourable member for Leicester East thought himself only last month not fit to be a member of the Home Affairs Select Committee, and given that the matters relating to his resignation are, as I've explained, unresolved, what makes him think that he's a fit and proper person to be a member of the Justice Committee this month? Mr. Speaker, I urge all honourable... I will.
Before my honourable friend draws his remarks to a conclusion, some correspondence has been referred to this evening, and I wonder if he would say whether it's possible to publish the correspondence to ensure that honourable members on both sides of the House have an opportunity to consider all of the facts.
Order. That's nothing to do with the debate, as I've just been advised by the clerk of the House. Don't frown at me, Mr. Berry. I know the facts and you're about to learn them. That's nothing to do with the debate tonight, point one. And secondly, there is no uncertainty or dubiety whatsoever about the correspondence between the honourable gentleman and me. And indeed, I don't think there's any uncertainty at all about the order, about the advice that was proffered, not just by me, but by the clerk of the House to the honourable gentleman. Whether he wishes and is astute enough to take that advice is another matter. Mr. Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend's failed attempt to help in this debate. Mr. Speaker, it's clear that the right honourable gentleman, the member for Leicester East, felt the need to resign last month from the Home Affairs Select Committee. I think it would be a huge mistake for this House to now place him in a position on the Justice Committee when he has so many questions to answer. I would urge all honourable and right honourable colleagues to vote against this appointment this evening.
Thank you. Order. The question is motion number 18 as on the order paper. As many as are there going to say aye? Aye. To the contrary, no. Division! Clear the lobby! question is motion number 18 as on the order paper. As many as other opinions say aye. Aye. For the contrary, no. Tellers for the ayes, Mr. David Ebenert and Mr. Alan Campbell. Tellers for the noes, Mr. Carl McCartney and Mr. Nigel Mills.